It appears that Lewis Hamilton has finally found a way to stifle the unrelenting efforts of Toto Wolff and Mercedes-Benz AMG F1 to sabotage his season. He lost all the first 5 intra-team races at the start of the season to his teammate, under circumstances that suggested that Mercedes were deliberately sabotaging his race. But, with his first podium in Spain yesterday, he has now finished ahead of his teammate in 3 of the last 5 races, under circumstances that suggest he has worked out how to keep a scorned Toto at bay. Perhaps this was why George was so furious during qualifying, and why bitter Toto saw nothing wrong in him being so disrespectful to the GOAT, with the reputation for being the fairest driver ever in F1 history. If you want evidence that Mercedes are salty about Lewis reigning in Spain, just check out their official website, and compare the energy they gave to the podium that they stole from Lewis in Canada, to give to George, and the energy they have given to Lewis stopping them from doing the same again in Spain. Oh, you can't go back in time, never mind, we recorded it for you, so watch and learn. What could possibly have prompted us to start recording the Mercedes homepage, to collect proof of how salty their Toto is? Apart from reviewing their homepage, a review of the performance data of both drivers to date tells the story of how Toto and Mercedes have possibly been sabotaging Sir Lewis for the benefit of George Russell. But before going further to show what the data reveals about how Sir Lewis has possibly overcome Mercedes' skullduggery, we invite those of you who haven't yet done so to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the notification icon to be notified when the next video is uploaded. Apart from instigating a media campaign to smear him, by suggesting amongst other things that he was going to retire at the end of the season, rather than go on to Ferrari, because he was so demotivated by being thrashed by George, or that he could be replaced by Toto's young teenage prodigy, bitter Toto and Mercedes have been messing around with his car during qualifying, and favoring George with team strategy during the race. Sir Lewis hinted as much in his post-qualifying press interviews in Monaco, and his teammate inadvertently confirmed this in his post-race interview in the next Grand Prix in Canada, when he blurted out that he had used Sir Lewis's data to steal pole position, while the person he copied from dramatically went from topping the 3rd practice session to 7th in qualifying. It is well known that when you study data over a sustained period, a pattern emerges which gives a deep insight into the trend underpinning that data. Well, 10 Grand Prix into the season, a clear pattern has emerged, suggesting that Mercedes have possibly been rigging performance against Sir Lewis. To begin with, his overall performance chart, from the first practice session to the end of the race, displays abnormally wild fluctuations. These uncharacteristic swings and dips in performance have not been witnessed before in Sir Lewis's 17-year career. Historically, when he gets going, he just keeps getting better and faster. And the last 5 races certainly suggest that. George's chart, by comparison, displays milder fluctuations that often run contrary to his teammates. For example, in the first Grand Prix of the season, Sir Lewis rose from 9th in first practice to 1st in P2, while George went from 7th to 2nd, but in 3rd practice, Sir Lewis dramatically dropped 11 places, while George suffered a smaller drop of 4 places. Both drivers improved 3 places in qualifying, but in the race, George dropped 2 places while Sir Lewis gained 2, and critically, recorded a significantly faster lap than his teammate during the race. This pattern, which has been repeated frequently during the season, suggests that in practice and on race day, Sir Lewis is faster, but somehow, George manages to pull out results in qualifying that give him an advantage at the start of the race that is difficult for Sir Lewis to overcome. It is a bit like Sir Lewis is being handicapped before the start of the race. So, the wild fluctuations in Sir Lewis's performance data is the first indication that something is going on behind the scenes. If one now delves deeper into the data, it is possible to see that George routinely outperforms Sir Lewis in practice 1, coming out on top 8 times. The purpose of the first practice data is to set the baseline for assessment going forward. In the second practice sessions, Sir Lewis outperforms George 5-3, in races excluding sprints, and 6-4 when sprint races are included. This tells us that when Sir Lewis starts to motor in the second practice session, he invariably makes the biggest improvements in performance and turns the table on George. However, when it gets to the third practice session, George is somehow able to turn the tables around. Well, we now know that one of the main reasons for this turnaround is that George copies Sir Lewis to improve his time. But how is the person copying consistently doing better than the original, if the original is not being handicapped? Critically, Sir Lewis pulling away in the second practice session, and then mysteriously getting overtaken by George in the third, is the second indication of something going on behind the scenes. The natural trend should be Sir Lewis continuing to pull away or a random switching of advantage. A pattern whereby George consistently overturns Sir Lewis's advantage is atypical, and suggests that something is going on behind the scenes. The concern of rigging is heightened when you now look at the performance in qualifying, where George astonishingly outperforms Sir Lewis 8-2. So, the pattern is that Sir Lewis makes the biggest and most significant baseline improvement, from P1 to P2, but George somehow manages to overturn that advantage in P3, and extend it dramatically in qualifying. Again, this is an atypical trend. As previously mentioned, one would expect Sir Lewis to build on his advantage from P2 to P3, in much the same way that George built on his advantage from P3 to qualifying. The fact that it is only George that can overcome and sustain an advantage is highly suspicious and exceptional. Sir Lewis was acutely aware of the mysterious loss in performance between practice and qualifying, and mentioned this in his post-qualifying interview in Monaco. The Monaco stats make for interesting analysis. Monaco being a historically narrow street race, with little or no room for overtaking and errors, is a supreme test of driver skill with limited opportunity for interference. It is therefore revealing that in Monaco, Sir Lewis outperformed George in all three practice sessions, but somehow ended up behind him in qualifying and in the race. In the first practice session, Sir Lewis finished first while George finished third. In the second practice session, he finished second while George dropped down to 10th. In the third practice session, he finished third while George improved to 6th. Yet somehow in qualifying George managed to finish 5th to Sir Lewis's 7th, and they finished the race in those same positions. It is rather convenient that George managed this feat on a track where it is notoriously difficult to overtake. Well, rolling on to the next race in Canada, where George is the beneficiary of another set of exceptionally astonishing performance data, following on from Monaco. A bit like watching Manchester City going from the poor neighbours with no silverware, to the flashy neighbours with no discernible source of income. Or seeing lightning strike twice, while on the riverbank watching a mermaid perched on the back of a unicorn, petting the Loch Ness monster. This time around, Sir Lewis finished P4 in practice 1, while George finished 10th. Somehow in practice 2, George came up from 10th to P2, while Sir Lewis dropped to 7th. In practice 3, Sir Lewis finished in P1, with George in P3. But lo and behold, come qualifying, George took pole while his teammate who he admitted copying from in practice 3, came 7th. Riddle me that. What is even more astonishing is that despite everything that had gone on before the race, with George starting on pole and Sir Lewis on 7th, Sir Lewis was on his way to finishing third on the podium, until he was overtaken by George with faster tyres. A situation that would not have been possible if Sir Lewis had been updated about George's tyre choice. Now, why did his race engineer not provide him with this information as a matter of course? So, we have clear evidence of information flowing from Sir Lewis to George, but not the other way. Faced with Mercedes' skullduggery, Sir Lewis has been doing everything he can to send out the message that something is going on behind the scenes. One striking message he has been able to send is that he consistently puts in faster laps than George during races. So, in the last 9 races, on 4 occasions when George has finished ahead of him, Sir Lewis has recorded the faster lap. George has only recorded the faster lap and finished ahead of his teammate twice, with Sir Lewis not finishing one of those races. This is Sir Lewis showing as best as he can, that all things being equal, he is faster than George. It appears that in Spain he has figured out how to rise above all the challenges that Toto and Mercedes keep placing in his path. After topping second practice, he looks to have kept something in hand, ending the third practice session 6th, 1 place behind George. However, he improved 3 places in qualifying, while George was only able to finish 4th. Is this what the rest of the season holds for Sir Lewis? Holding something back in practice, to stop his team from nobbling him in qualifying? Will he also have to remember to ask all the pertinent questions during the race, so that his team cannot adopt a don't ask, don't tell policy, when it comes to information flowing from George to him? Is this what it has come to in Mercedes? As we pointed out earlier, the Mercedes homepage speaks eloquently about how bitter Toto is about Lewis triumphing in Spain. 2 weeks ago, the headline image on their homepage was that of George celebrating his 3rd place on the podium, but the headline image on today's homepage is of George's car ahead of Sir Lewis's at the start of the race. You would have to go elsewhere to see Sir Lewis being congratulated for extending his record to 18 consecutive seasons with a podium finish, and also extending his record of the most podium finishes. They continue to damn him with faint praise while blowing up George's achievements that pale in comparison to those of Lewis that they are downplaying. Why would Mercedes be doing this? After all, Sir Lewis is still their driver, and they are the ones who wanted to usher him out to make way for Toto's promising prodigy. Is George's foul-mouthed outburst, condoned by bitter Toto, a sign that Mercedes are about to revert to their 2016 playbook that they loaned to Verstappen in 2021? Or is it a sign that their bag of tricks for sabotaging Sir Lewis in the garage has been nullified? Let us see how deep George is willing to go with a bitter Toto.